Good morning, everyone. I don't like to use mics, but everybody says, use your mic, so remind me if I don't keep it up here. But I am Barb Heflin, and I am a charitable giving specialist with a Conservancy on the fundraising team. I'm also the project lead on the Perch Lake addition to the Upper Manistee Headwaters Preserve, and you'll hear more about that as we go through the day and we go through the series. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming to the Milock Family Conservation Center. You are here for the inaugural event of something that we hope to continue as we move forward, but we're calling this the Priority Landscape Learning Series. This year we're going to feature the Perch Lake addition to Upper Manistee Headwaters as a priority land that needs protection and that we all need to care about. Before we do that, though, I want to thank you for coming. Many of you are supporters, many of you are on our board, many of you have supported the Conservancy for a long time, many of you volunteer, and we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you on behalf of all of us at the Conservancy. You make the work that we do possible. So thanks. So why are we here? The Priority Landscape Learning Series, as you can see on the chart, is something new that we're trying this year because as climate changes, as things change in our environment, the work that we do takes on a new urgency and a new sense of importance. And so we want to share with you some of the conservation practices, some of the stewardship practices that our team and our partners employ. And as we go through this series, which is, there are, if you haven't gotten them, there are flyers at the front desk that kind of show all of the series as we go between now and June. But we also will be partnering with the Botanic Gardens. We're partnering with the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, with the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians, with, who am I forgetting? The Nature Conservancy of Michigan. So we are a collaborative of folks who care about our environment and who care about the beauty of northern Michigan. So for all of you, thank you. And we hope that you enjoy this series. Today, we are going to feature Angie Bouma, who is our Senior Conservation Ecology Specialist. I'll get it right, Ange. And Matt Ross, who's the Executive Director of the Botanic Gardens. And they're going to share with us some thoughts about native plants, the importance of native habitat, and think about what you learn in the field and how you can translate that into what you take home, your front yard, your backyard. And what we hope that you learn as you go through this series is that your backyard, your front yard, is bigger than you think. It's all about our region. So with that, I don't know where I put the pointer. Oh, Angie has a pointer. Okay. So we do land protection. You guys know that. And we protect land in a variety of ways, but we work with private landowners to protect land with conservation easements. We work on public lands. We work with lots of townships and public entities who want to protect their land and create parks and natural areas. But we are focused really on protecting the critical watersheds of northern Michigan, about protecting farmland, and the forest land that's so valuable to us right now. Water quality is what we're all about. Land protection is critical to protect water quality. So we want to do that. We want to support wildlife habitat and help ensure the viability of farming in our area. So we've been doing it for 34 years. We've been at this since 1991, and in that time have protected over 48,000 acres of land, 157 miles of shoreline, and 126 miles of trail. And Marcia, you've been with us since most of the beginning of that. You've seen us get started. And we work in 5 counties: Antrim, Benzie, Grand Traverse, Kalkaska, and Manistee counties. We're going to use this series to introduce to you a set of conservation and stewardship practices that we employ in general. And then we're going to take each session sort of down to talking about that for a specific project for the addition to the Upper Manistee Headwaters Preserve, the Perch Lake addition. This is a picture of Perch Lake and a map. The dark green is the Upper Manistee Headwaters Preserve. It's about 1,350 acres. It is our second largest preserve to Arcadia Dunes, and we are working on the red polygon. That is the proposed Perch Lake addition. And the wetlands, the forests, the hardwoods, the native habitats, the wildlife that exist here really make this a very pristine wilderness area and deserving of our protection. This is very close to the headwaters of the Manistee River. Angie will talk about that a little bit more, but what happens up here in Kalkaska County has an impact all the way down to Manistee, where the river flows into Lake Michigan. So it really is a property that helps us put things in perspective about the importance of every action that we take and every property that we can protect from further development. With that, she says, I'm going to turn this over to Matt and Angie. If you guys have any questions, please holler. Angie is suffering from a little bit of a cold, so we'll have to recovering from a little bit of a cold. So she's going to try and talk her way through it, but we may make her hoarse. So
thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it. And Barb's a lifesaver, so I appreciate you very much. Thanks for coming today. It's just an honor to be here and to talk with you about these topics and to share some of the highlights of this amazing project that we're working on at the Conservancy. And many thanks to Matt for his willingness to come here today, and I'll be handing it over to him after a few slides. So, and like Barb said, my name's Angie, and I've been at the Conservancy for about 16 years, and I'm on the preserve team. I go out to new properties and do I'm fortunate enough to be the person who gets to go out and do the inventories of the flora and fauna, which feed into our management plans for the preserves. I thought I'd start with a bigger picture of our region. As Barb mentioned, we have a 5-county service area, and some of you may not be aware, you may be aware or not aware, but we're in a really unique ecological region here called the North Central Hardwoods, which is the small light blue number 51 zone there. That's where you see like the rich soils of the maple, beech, hemlock stands that you might not really see as you go to the drier sandy habitats on the Mayo Plateau or the ecoregion 51, which is more oak and pine. You do see maples all throughout the state, but here, this is a really unique ecoregion that is part of the big woods in Wisconsin. This is a very similar ecoregion type. I'd also thought it would be helpful to clarify when I'm talking about native plants, what does that mean? Pretty simple. It's a plant species that's been here for thousands of years or longer and is native to that ecoregion or area. And an invasive plant is a non-native species that can do harm to the native habitats. Not all introduced species are invasive. There's only a small percentage that are actually labeled as invasive, but we work hard to keep our habitats healthy, so it's useful to explain what these words mean. Listed species are rare species that are protected by state or federal rules, which we have many species on our preserves that are protected. And then we also map and care for plants that are declining, even if they're not listed. Again, the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy is really invested in the concept of using native plants for ecological restoration. We have a native plant greenhouse here that some of you may have seen before, and that really helps us create a healthy habitat for these preserves that we're in and engage community members. It's just a great facility to do this. And, you know, this photo of a butterfly on a spring cress is, you know, emblematic of why we're doing what we're doing. These native plants really provide the proper nectar and food sources for our declining insect species, which are the base of the food chain. So really important. Small steps matter. Again, native plants, why are we focused on them? There's many reasons. A lot of the time you'll see native plants and you think of prairie plants or beautiful showy flowers, but I like to highlight that trees are also native plants. They do a great job of filtering water and sediment and pollution and preventing erosion. And we are in a forested landscape here. We do have prairies that occur occasionally, but they're mostly like dry sand prairie, which is a different kind of prairie than what we might be used to in Illinois or southern Michigan. So our prairies they're very, what's the word? It takes some time to get to appreciate them. They have smaller plants. They're not as showy. It's, I guess, just a more subtle beauty to our our ecosystems. Native plants obviously provide food and wildlife, like Barb was saying, provide habitat, and they can be really aesthetically pleasing. And Matt will get into more of how you can do this in your own landscape. That was Perch Lake, that picture there. And then I thought to harken back to what I was saying about the invasive plants and how we're not that concerned about that many introduced plant species, but there are a handful that we do focus on. This is a inventory of all the plants that have been found on the Conservancy properties over the years. The Conservancy is really forward-thinking, and they've been doing inventories since 1991 on their new properties, so we have a lot of data that we can pull from. And we have about 800 native plants, maybe more. This is a 2018 graphic, but 188 introduced species. And then you can see that small sliver is the invasive plants. And the other small green sliver are the listed species. So we have 6 listed species, 26 invasive plants, 188 introduced or non-native species, and about 800 native plants. So as Barb mentioned, we are focusing on Perch Lake and how these healthy habitats tie into watersheds. Obviously, if you have a natural area that's been converted to concrete or lawn, you're going to lose all those ecosystem services that property provides to that watershed. So the annual long grass that we have much shallower roots than our native plants. The other benefit of this preserve is obviously the filtration that it provides to the Upper Manistee River watershed. I've worked on the habitat mapping for Upper Manistee Headwaters since 2016, and that's been a real pleasure to explore out there. It feels like you're up in the Upper Peninsula when you're out there. It's just a magical place. There are many habitats types. We have dry northern forest, which is a rather rare forest type that's composed of native red pine stands. What most of us are used to seeing are pine plantations or rows of trees. So here we actually have a remnant natural red pine stand, which is pretty special. I also thought it would be interesting to show This is the plant inventory that we've done thus far at Perch Lake, and we're just getting started, so this number will probably rise over the years, but it's at 54 for the floristic quality inventory, and you can see the regional average is 35 and a degraded site is 20, just underscoring how important Perch Lake is from a floristic standpoint. These metrics are all from plant lists that we do, and then you can run them through the universal FQA site, and it gives you all these statistics. It's really a helpful tool to gauge the health of the habitat, because some of these plants are indicators of healthy habitat. They literally won't be there if the habitat is not functioning well. This is a good example of one. This is trailing arbutus, which I did not put the C value or the W value in, but this is I think it's a 7. It's each plant in Michigan gets a score from 0 to 10, indicating how specific it is to a certain habitat type. And the higher up the scale, the more specific that plant is to a specific habitat type. So, for example, ragweed, which is a native weedy species, is a 0. Cattails are a 1. They can be found in a wide variety of habitats. Whereas a plant like pitcher's thistle or trailing arbutus are in the 7 to 10 range because they're very specific. They need a certain set of habitat criteria to thrive. And then I put in a few fun facts for these plants. Matt actually contributed this one. Thank you for that. And I did not know this, but these are very fragrant plant species. They're very low growing, and it was used in the perfume industry at the turn of the century. And the other thing this plant was used for was Christmas decorations, and it was over-harvested to the point where they passed a law restricting harvesting of certain plants, and this was one of them. It's called the Christmas Greens Act. Another declining species, although our most common and recognizable orchid, this one does occur out at Perch Lake, and it's not something you could grow in a garden per se, and it is susceptible to poaching. But it is the pink lady slipper in the Cypripedium genus, which is a really charismatic and beautiful family in the orchid family. A lot of folks might not know we have orchids in Michigan, and Michigan is actually it's a good hotspot of biodiversity for orchids. We have about 54 orchid species. Florida is definitely the epicenter of all the orchids, but Michigan's not too shabby. So they're much smaller, though, and we don't have the epiphytes, unfortunately. But this group is just really charismatic and one of our most showy species out at Perch Lake. And this is a fun plant that is a great fall foliage species, fire-dependent species called huckleberry, also a 7. You find this in dry northern forests. It's not too common, but it's in the same family as blueberries. It's pretty common out at Perch Lake. And I could go on and on about these plants, but I probably better speed it up. This is wood betony. This is a really interesting plant. It's a C value 10. Which means it is very restricted to healthy habitats that can support the species. And it's hemiparasitic, which means it taps into the roots of nearby plants to get some extra nutrients. A lot of our plants will do this in our dry, acidic soils here in Michigan. We don't have the rich organic soils of southern Illinois, unfortunately, but our plants have learned how to get around it. And then a beautiful plant that's often used in restoration and landscaping. This is out at Perch Lake as well. And it's actually a 7, so it's also pretty particular about where it grows, but it's a little more forgiving. And it's a really important plant for hummingbirds and butterflies, cardinal flower. And then we have our aquatics. Perch Lake is obviously full of aquatic plants. This one I thought I'd mention, as it's also a C value 10, a flat-leafed bladderwort. If you haven't heard of bladderworts before, they're fascinating. They're a carnivorous, insectivorous plant that traps insects in little leaf traps on its stems and leaves. There are 11 species in Michigan. They're often mistaken for Eurasian water milfoil, so it's really important to learn this plant if you're doing Eurasian water milfoil work. They do bloom above the water. If you see little yellow flowers over the lake, it could be one of these guys. And then we have our one of our most popular plants in the 8-year-old group. My son is 8, and this is his favorite plant because it, It's also carnivorous and traps insects to make up for the poor nutrients in bog situations, which is where it lives. So it's evolved over time to adapt to those acidic conditions, and there's many carnivorous plants that have done this over time. And then one of our beautiful shrubs that we have out there is the buttonbush, which grows in a variety of places, but is not as common as like alder or tag alder, but it can form pretty big stands and really good. This is a very good pollinator plant. If you're doing shoreline restoration and you have the right conditions, it could be a good species to include in your mix. And with that, I'll just touch on the, like Barb was saying before, why does all this matter? Every bit counts, and you can see here where Perch Lake is located, the red dot at the top. The addition there flows all the way down to Lake Michigan. The watershed facts, I can just quickly read through those, but the Manistee River's main branch is 232 miles long, and it covers 12 counties. And the Perch Lake addition itself is 342 acres and protects the entirety of Perch Lake, which is a shallow glacial lake that is connected to the river. If anyone is curious about learning more about some of these species, or you are interested in your own restoration project, I thought it wouldn't hurt to highlight our partners who the Go Beyond Beauty website is what I usually refer people to if they had questions or wanted help with their own landscapes. They have all the local nurseries and landscapers listed who've made a commitment to using native plants and avoiding invasive species in their work. And then I included some of the pretty Lepidoptera of the region, and one of the beetles that we hear a lot about monarch butterflies as a specialist species, which is good, but I always try to highlight the milkweed beetle as well, which is also a specialist species on milkweed. So without these native plants, we lose these all the biodiversity that we have around some of these relationships that have evolved over thousands of years. And on that note, I had to include a fern, as Rick can testify to. Ferns also, I didn't have one in the slide schematic, but there's about, I think, 8 or 10 different fern species at Perch Lake. But with that, I guess I'll hand it over to Matt, and he can run through what his work entails. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie and Barb, and I also want to thank Costanza for putting this together. When we first started talking about it, we looked at why does conservation matter when it comes to your own home landscape, and why having pristine areas like Perch Lake are important for people like me that are working in the public sector for Botanic Gardens to hopefully influence some of the landscape decisions that you all make. So, there we go. Welcome to the asylum. I always share this slide to put things in frame of reference. For those of you that haven't been to the Botanic Garden, is there anybody who has not been to the Botanic Garden? Okay, good. Okay, a couple reluctant hands went up. We are located at the former Northern Michigan Asylum, and what was once decay still had beauty, still had plant life beyond it, and we've continued to grow from the old dairy barns and the old farms into a thriving botanic garden over the last 10 years. And if you haven't gotten a chance to go out and experience the gardens, when you go, you'll notice our plant palette's incredibly swayed towards native plants. That was done prior to my arrival, but obviously that was one of the things that I'm very passionate about. So when you see gardens like this that's focused on Great Lakes native plants, and you look at the overall composition of the genera that we have at the gardens, it's about a 70-30 mix. 70% of the plants that we have on site are native to our region, and that's continuing. So for those of you that are interested in designing and using native plants in your own landscape or moving from the field to the front yard, hopefully I'll give you guys a couple pointers today. So when you go out and you get a chance to experience nature, and I mentioned having these pristine areas is so vital, It is because when we look at recreating nature, no one does it better than Mother Nature. And as a designer, if you're trying to make your garden have the same essence, or your landscape have the same essence as beautiful places like many of the spots that the GTRLC manages, is to go out and you actually have to look at the plants. You have to see what things are growing together. How are they growing? Where are they growing? And this is a pretty vital exercise for those of us in the landscape. Far too often we love what nature's providing, but we don't know how to decipher what's happening in those original plant communities and how to bring that into a much smaller scale or more residential scale. And the best advice I tell people all the time when they say, I'm interested in landscaping with native plants, is I ask them, how many times do you go out in nature during the week? How many times are you going out and you're looking at it with a different lens? So hopefully after today, you won't be mad at me, but you'll look at nature in a very different way. You'll love and appreciate the beauty that's in front of you, but I hope you'll have a little discerning eye and start looking at what relationships are happening and dive really deep into the plant palette. So that when you go to places out in Sleeping Bear Dunes and our surrounding habitat, instead of seeing this larger landscape, you're bringing it down to the plant scale. And you're really looking at how plants like Arctostaphylos work with other plants like Solidagos. You have a great resource right here. You have some of the best looking Arctostaphylos I've ever seen, and people ask me all the time, how do you get it to grow? I've had it in my garden for years. I pamper it, and I'm like, well, there's your first problem right there, is you pampered it. When you see Arctostaphylos doing well, you know it's neglected and it's an area that is in horrible soils. Just a side note, we brought in 4 different sources of Arctostaphylos in our garden, and the only ones that have done really well for us are hyper-local. So if you're bringing an Arctostaphylos that's grown outside of the state, outside of our germplasm, it struggles here. It also struggles in really good garden settings. So if you want to have a dune-like habitat, if you don't have sandy soils and you don't match the ecosystem or the ecotype, you're going to really struggle to make that successful. So this whole practice is the practice of field botany. And when you hear the word field botany, I know that many of your minds are going back in time to many of these gentlemen, right? And what do you notice here? What's our common bond? Old, white, males, sometimes wigged, sometimes bearded, all with interesting backstories to them. So you have Carlos Linnaeus, Joseph Bank, both of which had somewhat problematic pasts, really problematic from Joseph Banks, but they're really thought of as the fathers of botany. That couldn't be farther from the truth. While these men have all done amazing things and have advanced us, and I hate putting people like W.J. Beale amongst Joseph Banks, who in my light is a villain, they have had interesting pasts. But field botany is not just white men in suits and wigs going out and doing this work. It happened far more often, even prior to their existence. If you look at the original botany, it was done in many ways from a more Western perspective, starting with Theophrastus, so a Greek philosopher, and looking at how plants affect the human body. Now, I just got back from a month in Japan, and they're like, that's very cute that you think that that's when botany started, because we've been doing it for millennia prior to. And then right here in our own community, you talk to the Anishinaabe, and they're like, so for 6,000 years when we've been doing this work, and you're like, yep, this is something that's been happening far, far more often, more frequently, done by women of color, and people other than white guys in wigs with great facial hair, right? So it is one of the oldest fields of science. The earliest herbals include the Hippocratic corpus, which really was a game changer for Western views of botany. So I don't want to discredit the work that was done by the men that I showed in the first slide. Their work was instrumental in framing how we view botany today, but I'd like to encourage you to think that this is where botany and field botany is today. And that's what the future of our generations. Having someone like my young nephew here learn about hoary cocoon by going out and seeing it in the wild, right? Going out and seeing how critical dune habitats are preserved. And you all can partake in field botany, and you probably do it and don't even know it, right? So how many of you actively practice field botany? You go out into the woods, into the forest, into the fields, into the dunes, and you're actively trying to identify all the plants that you see. Okay, we're in a good crowd. What I want to share today is that practice can then be taken and transcribed into how you view your landscape from a design perspective, from a maintenance standpoint. But there's a couple ground rules. One is to make sure to stick to the path. Private land only if you're doing any sort of collection whatsoever. There is 2 seasons for me in Michigan. It is winter, and then it's orange season. So orange season, I always wear orange. When I'm out in the field, I do it on purpose. I have orange jackets, I have orange shirts, I have reflective gear, I have reflective hats because I've been shot at in the woods before, right? And I'm not kidding with you. It's happened to me in the past. Wasn't even hunting season. I was near a gun range and there was a guy just missing the targets really poorly, right? But if you wear orange, you make yourself visible. The other thing I'm going to show you is a little trick with orange as well. Whatever you do, do not poach or contribute to poaching. And you might be like, I would never poach. How would I contribute? If you have geotagged locations of sensitive plant material, there are people that scour the internet looking for it so that they can go out and poach. I don't want to scare you because I want to make sure that you have fun. What should you bring? A map. You can even take a live screenshot. So if you're in an area that's got poor cell reception, I always take a picture of the trailhead and do a screenshot of it if I'm using all trails. Boots, wearing orange again. Bear spray or bear deterrents if you're in that neck of the woods. Field guides, a camera. The best camera you got is the one that's in your hand. Most of the times that's going to be a cell phone. A sketch pad or journal, and if you're collecting specimens, then keep a press in your car. You also might want to bring a hand lens or a loop. If anybody's into botany, that's one of the best ways to get to know your plants and get to identify them is to have a small magnifying glass. And then a friend, that's optional. Okay, if you're hiking with me, I have friends that are like, oh, I'm a thru hiker, I'm an ultra marathoner, and I'm like, we would not be great hiking partners, right? You want to go 125 miles in a day, and I want to go maybe 125 yards and see how many plants I can identify. Always make sure you bring water. And I mentioned that hat. I also use that for scale. So here I am with some Drosera. If you guys know our carnivorous flora, this is a really cool sundew at a bog, and you can see it helps provide contrast in photos as well. Bring the right tools for the job. Here we are on a collecting trip. This is with permitting with Ethan Kaufman, who's one of the best field botanists in the States. Here we are collecting some Quercus ilicifolia in Pennsylvania. So what are some of the lessons from the field? One is never take height, width, and spread maximums as the gospel truth. You probably have read Dur if you're a plant person. Dur tells you that a Ilex opaca is only going to get about 15 to 20 foot tall, or American holly, here it is about 80 foot tall. It's going to tell you that Nyssa sylvatica maxes out at 30 and it never really gets that much girth. Here I am and I can't even hug it at Bear Swamp out in New Jersey. The other thing you'll learn when you're out in the field is that there's so much diversity that's out there that's not included in the commercial trade. And by going out and seeking out interesting plants, you can help actively encourage our local native plant growers to expand their plant palette. So I'm on a kick. I've been wanting marsh skullcap or scutellaria for years to be produced. And every time I see our local growers, I'm like, hey, I saw it out in this amazing plant community. Could you grow it? Timing is everything. Here I am with a population of white-fringed orchids. If I would have been out there 2 weeks later, they wouldn't have ever been noticed. They would have been already in seed. If I would have been out there a week earlier, there would have been nothing there except green foliage. Same thing goes for insects. Even though I normally check the leaves to see if there's been herbivory when I'm out looking for insects and lepidopteras and then this beautiful monarch here, if I would have been there a week or two earlier, it would have been in chrysalis. Never would have seen it. If I would be there 2 or 3 weeks later, it might have moved on. And then remember to dress for all occasions. The back of my car is not a very attractive scene. I've got boots, I've got muck boots, I've got clips, and just about everything else you can imagine back there. But you could always throw a pair of muck boots in the back of your car, make life a lot easier for you. Take pictures from all angles. We're going to talk about conducting a virtual soil analysis and researching your ecoregion, follow up and go back different times. So oftentimes you'll go to a site and you'll see one array of flora, and they come back 3 weeks later and the whole thing has changed. We just talked about hickory. The hickory properties, they change every week. Our Botanic Garden changes every day, right? And then take accurate notes. It kills me as a Michigan State alumni to say that we aren't the best in botany in the state when it comes to our herbarium. And as we have an amazing one, an historic one with W.J. Beale specimens, nobody's got a better online herbarium than University of Michigan. Do any of you use this resource? Okay, a couple of you. This is great because it tells you not only are these plants found in your region, but it also tells you if they've naturalized, if they were introduced, and where they sit within the herbarium collection. Angie mentioned ecoregion. Knowing your ecoregion is important, and knowing where your home sits within the ecoregion is equally as vital. And I'll show you a little bit more detailed map. This is one step further than what Angie shared earlier. And if you look behind me, you'll see here's 51, and here's 50. And if you look at the area that's covered by the GTRLC, there's about 5 to 7 sub-ecoregions that are present. That's pretty diverse compared to when you look at other parts of the state where you might only have, 5 counties and only have 2 or 3. You can do that work. You can type your address in online and find your ecoregion, but you can also find out what your soils, what your native soils are supposed to be. This is called the Web Soil Survey. It's your tax dollars at work. It's done by the USDA and the NRCS, and you can search an area of interest, including your own backyard or maybe a place that you're hiking or going to hike at, and it will tell you all the different soil characteristics of that area. Pretty great resource. It's kind of complicated if you're looking to drill down to real specific information, but it does tell you this right here, which are your soil types, and then they tell you all about those individual areas. Has anybody done this to their home? Awesome. This is how you match what's happening at your home and what should be there originally. Yes? It's called the Web Soil Survey. If you just Google Web Soil Survey, it'll be the first thing that pops up. So then how do I take and make that experience of being out in the field, doing my research, knowing my ecoregion, knowing my soil, and make that translate into a native plant design? Well, you're going to be balancing a lot of things. The number one reason people buy plants is what color their flowers are. That goes into aesthetics, right? So 70% of consumers buy plants between May 1st and June 1st. If it's not blooming then, it doesn't hit the market. Okay, so you've got that other 30% of the plants being purchased from June 1st all the way to April 31st. Okay? Oftentimes we forget about ecosystem services, what these plants do, the environmental conditions that we already talked about laying out, and then what level of management you want to partake in. Right? So she showed us a C value 7 button bush. It's one of those plants that's almost bulletproof. I'm surprised that not everybody here has one in their landscape because they're really easy to grow, right? But then you get into things like Dirca palustris, which is leatherwood, a lot harder to grow, a lot harder to maintain, okay? And then connection. I always want to make sure that you have an emotional connection. If you don't love that plant and you don't like gush over it and want your friends to see it when it's in bloom, or here it is having its leaves stripped by the black swallowtail larva, if you don't love it or you don't have a connection to it, why is it in your landscape? Okay. So here we are, Bearsfoot Native Nursery. They're one of the best growers around. They do a great job. Here we have a stand of little bluestem. Now, I know little bluestem. I drive by and I'm like, okay, cool. It's an awesome plant. How many of you have tried to seed it in a large area? Right? How's your success rate been? Okay, 0.3%, right? So this is where I'm like, okay, if this is your goal, and they did this is 7 years of intense management by professionals, you could do the same thing with plugs, right? So you see that little bluestem habitat, and you want that look, you can use plugs. Same thing here. This is at Bondsville Mill, a project I worked on in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. When I went to research this project, I went to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I went out to areas where there were rock cliffs, where there were exposed rock areas that were in the same ecoregion, and looked at what plants were growing there and then brought those same plants back into this habitat. Similarly, Newfields. This is an awesome garden. It's the former Indianapolis Museum of Art. They wanted to recreate nature. They wanted to have a bird flyway through the site of where Mr. Lilly used to watch the White River. And they cut down all the woody plants that were there because that's what wasn't there originally. It was part of a floodplain. They wanted to design this beautiful array that you see in front of them. So what did they do? They traveled and traversed floodplains, looked at what was growing there, and then brought that together to make that mosaic. So how does field botany help me in the landscape scale? Well, your experience looking at what plants grow together is critical, right? Understanding what constitutes a habitat. You get a chance to explore how plants grow in nature, understand the function of the plant. If you don't understand the plant's function, it's really hard to work it into your own garden. You appreciate the effects that we've had on nature and provide that really intersectional perspective of what happens in nature and then how I can emulate that at home. Okay? And we're used to a lot of standard practices that say things like plants in 3s and 5s, create straight lines, have a border, have X, Y, and Z, and you really need to try to break that trend. You can do that using native plants, but my biggest suggestion to you is to understand the plant community that you're working with. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I would say the dune gardens are a classic example. When you go right outside the door on your right-hand side, I was going to include pictures of it in here. If you want to know what grows in a dune, that's what grows in a dune because they recreated a dune. We did the same, I'm going to show you in one of ours coming up. So we talked a lot about water quality, and the landscapes that are around water include things like shorelines, beaches, banks of rivers and streams, wetlands, floodplains, dunes, then barrens and forests that are a little bit external, all of which are within an hour's drive away from Perch Lake. So shorelines and beaches, when you go out here, what type of plants do you normally experience? Dune grass, right? But what else? It's not just the grass. Thistles, pitcher's thistle. Not going to be a great landscape plant, but that's fine. We're going to appreciate it in nature. What else? Hoary puccoon, another one. Really, really tough to grow. You can occasionally find them at Four Seasons Nursery. They're very expensive, and they don't always last. Great one to appreciate in nature. Solidagos, sumacs, asters, right? We always think of just the grasses, but there's so much more that's happening. Similarly, when I go to riverbanks and streams, what do I normally think of? Tamarack. Yep, great landscape plant if you have water on site, right? What else? Our dogwoods, buttonbush, willows, totally underrated genus, right? Everybody gets scared. They're like, oh, it's going to crack the cement. Well, that's if you mishandle it. That's if you misplace it, right? And you can coppice them. They've been doing it for thousands of years overseas. Okay? Then floodplains, very similar. You're going to have a larger grass component in the floodplains. Swamps, it's just essentially a wetland with a forest on top. We have great ones near us. And, of course, marshes. And marshes often viewed as just being grasses. There is so much more that's happening there. I was just at Arcadia Marsh this past weekend, and you get to see the seed pods of last year's Verbena stricta. You get a chance to see the seed pods of Bidens. And if you have a marsh in your area or you have an area that's marshy, these are the type of plants that you can go to. Similarly, bogs, we normally think of looking just like this, but I encourage you to look down at the ground, and you will see a totally different bog. And we have these plants here. We have these unique habitats here. Dunes, obviously, amazing plants. We have not just Arctostaphylos. We have sand cherry. We have poplars. We have a lot of different things going on in dunes. There we go. Barrens, I get asked all the time, I want to have lupin in the garden. They see the lupin in our garden, they fall in love, and I'm like, that's a hybrid. That's a very interesting case. That's inside a contained area. It's not getting out into the woods. It's not getting out in any other areas. But when you talk about native lupin, this is the view, and everybody's like, oh man, I love lupin. I totally want it in my garden. You're like, you have clay soils. This is never going to work for you. Where it grows, barrens, huge deposits of sand where nothing else is growing. It goes summer dormant in some places or fall dormant in other places. So I look at, do I want this plant in my garden, or do I want to go and appreciate it in nature and support organizations that are conserving it there? Forest. I look at forest in multitude of different ways. They're one of the most dynamic ecosystems in our area. And as Angie was talking about us being kind of in the heart of the northern forest. There is so much diversity here. There's spring ephemerals, almost never used in the landscape. Why? They don't bloom on Mother's Day, right? They're harder to grow and they go away. So someone going to invest in something and then it goes away a month later? Probably not. This is America, instant gratification, right? So trilliums, some people can get them to grow well on their landscape. Others are going to just, it's a fruitless effort. You're going to spend thousands of dollars to try to get a trillium to grow. Why is that? Because they typically grow in areas that are not well manicured and well irrigated and well fertilized in the summer. Okay. So looking at the Botanic Garden, how we utilize field botany to help us in our ways. We created a foraging meadow. I don't know how many of you have been there. It's 2 years old now, coming up in May. And we created a design intent to work collaboratively with our Anishinaabe community to create a living landscape where we celebrate the plant's medicinal, culinary, and spiritual importance in a welcoming setting for all. We set 3 goals for ourselves: develop plant groupings based on ecosystem, create and maintain a garden without the use of pesticides, and select plants that can eventually be foraged by local community members. So once we set our goals and our intentions, we looked at our top 3 challenges: incredibly poor soil health. We're tackling over 100 years of invasive species proliferation, heavy deer pressure. Created the framework for a narrative, creating a place for healing, working together and learning so much from each other, an aesthetically appealing landscape that breaks traditional design concepts for native plant gardens. Tall order, right? So how do we do it? We surveyed the land, we worked with the soil that we had, and to create this beautiful medicine wheel that we had already started, we started by sketching and looking at what's going to happen around it at the foraging meadow. We walked the site, we looked at the soil, we looked for differences in what we were doing. We then went out into nature and we hiked and we went to areas that were indicative of 7 different ecosystems. So we went out to those 7 ecosystems and looked at what was blooming multiple times throughout the year, myself and Laurel Varan and many others. Then we knew we had really impoverished soils and we couldn't use pesticides, so we went through a series of cover cropping exercises. We then seeded, and we added a seed layer. Some of you said, oh, I seeded little blue stem. We seeded thousands of little blue stem out there. Will they come to fruition? We'll see in 7 years, right? So in addition to seeding, we went into plugging, and we did as much preparation as we possibly could to make sure that we were starting off with a great basis. We went into plugs. Here I am with Tara John, and we plugged in plants from those ecosystems while also learning the ways of the Anishinaabe, offering song, tribute, and in this case, white sage to our land. Oh, all right, gonna go back. There we go. And our establishment went pretty well, but it's a lot of work, right? So I remember when I talked about that management aspect of the landscape design, we have a volunteer who came out one day and he walked into the gardens and he goes, man, this place looks like a weed patch. I was like, well, congratulations. We're looking for a garden captain. Would you like to help us clear it? And he worked tirelessly to make sure that this garden was going to be a success. And you can see many of our volunteers out there working to combat our 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which happened to be bindweed, brome grass, which was proliferated for 100 years, knapweed, and bladder campion. Many of you probably struggle with these same plants. And it's an uphill battle, but we make sure we do it, and we have fun when we're doing it. And here's Jack doing that exact work. And in 1 year's time, I will just tell you that this garden has provided over 60 gallons of white sage back to our tribal members. We've brought back sacred tobacco, which kind of challenges the perspective of what a native plant is because it's been grown for thousands of years here, even though it's not native to Michigan's germplasm. It's now been brought back to the Gitagon, and the GTP are growing it for the first time in a naturalized way in 150 years. We have been inviting our community members from the GTP to come out and forage from the area. And this is its original establishment when our seed bank first started coming in, and it's continued to grow and look beautiful. We hope to have you guys come out and see it. It's not our only example of how we used field botany to help us in creation of a new space. We also did the same thing when we looked at ways to enhance our existing Great Lakes garden that you see here. And then for you at your scale, I'd highly encourage you, if you're not aware, Wild Ones has created about 80 different native garden designs for residential scale that are free and open to the public. I was part of this program when I was a board member for the organization for about 6 years. And guess what? They have one for Grand Rapids. And while Grand Rapids is an ecoregion south, it does give you a good idea and a good way to model what you could do in your own home landscape, looking at plant communities rather than individual plants. How can you learn more? Well, I had about 30 minutes of your time. I'd love more of your time. You guys can join us over at the Botanic Garden. If you're not a member, love to have you join us. Or if you want to volunteer with us, we're also open to that as well. We're really grateful to have the partnership with the GTRLC. And the other way that you can really learn more is to come out and visit us as we go to Perch Lake on June 12th and June 13th. So at that time, I can bring Angie back up and we can field any questions that you guys might have. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, Michigan Natural Features Inventory. It has it broken down by habitat type, and they have plant lists for each habitat type. Super helpful.
And then also building a relationship with your local grower. If you're into native landscaping, that is critical. So I have conversations with Garrett and Blythe all the time, with Matt over at Black Cap, with Brian Zimmerman over at Four Seasons, with Bill down in Lansing, and with Angie and others, where we talk about what's working in the landscape. Mm-hmm. In terms of plant nurseries, the ones I just mentioned, and then there's also the Native Plant Guild that has a listing of some of the smaller ones as well. Those are the ones that are more hyper-local, and again, it goes back to your frame, what you want to have as being native. You also have Pine Hill carries native plants. What's the one in Skegamog? Barker Creek carries natives as well. A lot of them buy from Bill, who's down in Lansing, and he creates small plants or plugs. Then they step them up to the next level. So a lot of those plants actually originated in Lansing. And he does 2 public sales a year, and I don't know the dates of them, but that's another really good source. I tell people all the time, if you're looking to landscape a large area, then I would go to Landscape Ready plugs. They're going to be way better than buying in a gallon or a 2-gallon or a 3-gallon. Those plants you're buying in quantity. So the smallest that I know in our region are Bird's Foot Native Nursery are 38 cell plug trays. So you're buying 38 plants. Now that could be alarming for some of you because the price point on that is going to be higher than if you were buying, 10 plants in a gallon, but your coverage is much bigger. So if you're up for the task of like, hey, I'm going to create a native garden and I'm going to do the weeding between those plants to create that plant community, you're going to be much better going with Landscape Ready plugs. The other hot tip that I give people all the time is I'm not a purist. Many of you are not purist in any part of your life. And if you want to add other plants that bring you joy into your native garden, do it. You can also utilize them to help you bring in your pollinators. And I'll give you an example. If I buy plugs and I have a large area, the size of this room, and I'm putting in plugs, there's obviously going to be holes between the plants, right? That's not how nature works, right? Nature works as a layer. You're adding one sheet in a much larger layer. There's nothing wrong with you going, and I do this all the time when I'm building meadows, when I'm building native areas. I'll use annual salvias to fill that void. So I'll seed some of the plants that I want long-term that might not pop up right away. I'll add my plugs in, and then I will plant annual salvias in between, and I'll tell you why. They bring your pollinators in, so it's like, hey, if you'd like to make a home here and maybe oviposit your future generations in this new landscape, bingo, we gotcha. It also adds a sense of color, and it adds a sense of joy, so you're not going to be begrudgingly taking out all the weeds in between. Instead, you've got a beautiful mix of salvia that are not competitive that will die at the end of the year.
That's a really good point, and it reminded me to mention how important your goals are for your property and your vision. So for the Conservancy, we're working in a unique situation where we're working in high-quality natural areas where we are a little more restricted in our palette. But homeowners obviously can plant whatever, like Matt said, brings you joy. The Conservancy tries to stay as close to type as possible when we're doing our plant species list, but it is a work of art in some cases. But we do frost seeding, which is a way you can seed plants on the ground at certain times of year, and then through the freeze-thaw cycle, it works the seeds down to the right depth in the soil, and that's another way that you can hedge your bets with those plugs.
And I'd say from the Botanic Garden's perspective, everything that's in the Anishinaabe Healing Garden is straight species and hyper-local. As you move further away and you go to the area that our native garden, or Great Lakes Garden, that's between the barn and the visitor center, is cultivars. So if you want to see some of the differences between the two, you can see it directly at the Botanic Garden. You go to the Pollinator Garden, it's a mix of straight species and cultivars. At the Children's Sensory Garden that we're developing now, it's a mix of non-native, native cultivars and straight species as well. So you get a chance to see that whole array. And we've done some preliminary studies. It was a 1-year study looking at insect movement. And it's all not scientifically proven, but anecdotally, a lot of those plants did incredibly well when we had a mix of both native cultivars. And the main reason was you had extended blooming periods. So when you go out and you're doing point sampling, if you have nothing in bloom, you're going to have less pollinators. It's just common sense. And there's research out from Great Dixter in the UK and from Chanticleer that are showing you can integrate both those things. You don't have to be exclusively purist. Unless if your goals are like the GTRLC, where they're not going to have salvia out in front here, we get a little bit more flexibility at the Botanic Garden. But I would say that your dune and our dune have a lot of similarities. We brought in soil, we brought in sand for ours to make those dune habitats. And they're an area that a lot of people ask about, and they're like, what am I supposed to do with my shoreline? What am I supposed to do with my sand dune? And there's not a lot of good references where you can go and see those gardens and what they look like. And we're trying to provide that in the community.
Just again to highlight the poor soils of our region, to embrace them because we are a sandy area, so we have plants that can adapt to that, and I think those dune gardens really highlight how adaptable our local plants are to those environmental conditions.
Yeah, wild type. Yep. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that, but yeah, Bill runs wild type. Yep. And Michigan Wildflower Farm with their seed mixes are really good as well, especially if you want Michigan-based. Now, there are companies that have Michigan strains that are much bigger as well. Go for it.
So you mentioned Perch Lake, June 12th and 13th.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing?
Okay.
And number 2 is, Angie, how many plugs do you grow in the greenhouse?
Go for it.
Well, for the hike, my understanding is we'll be doing a botany hike with Matt and myself and Barb and possibly Chris Skarrock, our director of stewardship, and we'll be learning about the hike and seeing interesting flora along the way. So pretty informal. Is that correct? Yeah. And then we might use iNaturalist to take a few points as well. We have iNaturalist projects on our website, which are great because it shows you all of the species on a particular preserve. If you go to the GTRLC website, you can scroll down, and it's a great resource to have for seeing what's on a nature preserve. And then in terms of our greenhouse, we produce about 10 to 15,000 plugs a year. So we're at 28,000 since 2023. And we have collaborated with the Botanic Garden and donated some to their projects. And we're working on that. But right now it's pretty in-house. It's for GTRLC restoration projects only. But we do support Conservation District plant sale. I mean, we direct people to plant sales at Conservation Districts and local nurseries. So Garrett and Blythe from Bird's Foot Nursery are our advisors too in the greenhouse. So we have about 17 to 26 species, and I think Bill at Wild Type has like 400. So we're trying to stick to like the workhorse species on our end at this point.
I'd say in the Anishinaabe Gardens we have 4,700 plugs, but we also have a lot of seeded plant material in there, so we probably have about 7,000 individual plants. And our species mix there, we're probably closer to like 200 or 300. It's way more in depth than what you're seeing, because you're seeing it at a point in time. Like the dune habitat, we have these 2 dunes that we created, and there might be 20 different species on each of those tiny little dunes. That's, from here to the chair, not all of them are going to be up at the same time. So you see things like one of my favorite plants that nobody uses in the landscape is Pulsatilla morii, or Pulsatilla patens is the other species. Pasque flower. Well, it's becoming popular now by plant enthusiasts, plant nerds, and breeders, because there's a lot of opportunity there. But it's not a plant that most of us know, right? Pulsatilla or pasque flower, not a ubiquitous plant. Well, it's only up and blooming for about a month of time, and then it creates this seed pod that looks kind of hairy and ratty. I love it, but would your neighbors love to see a bunch of hairy and ratty seed heads on top? Maybe, maybe not, But it's a plant that easily layers. So I've got that Hypericum, Pussy Toes, and Western Paccara all in one by one area. So it's really densely planted, and that's our prerogative. We have a moniker out there. We weed and plug, we weed and plug, and we weed and plug, and weed and plug, and weed and plug. And that's how you combat invasive species. We have a plethora of roots from brome grass, from bindweed, and the only way we can fight it, because we don't use pesticides, is to weed it out, plug it in. Weed it out, plug it in. The other big hot tip is that we use black-eyed Susan seed our first year. It's like yellow wildfire out there, right? You plant black-eyed Susan seed, you'll get it everywhere. It's the only thing that pops up really in your first year and does successful and blooms in 1 year's time. Then we go through and we edit it. I'd rather weed black-eyed Susan all day over weeding out bladder campion and bindweed and knapweed.
Yeah, go ahead. No, not yet, but our volunteer coordinator told us about those. That they were at the Wildflower Association of Michigan conference, and we have not started that yet, but we are looking into doing dogwood cuttings at some point. So, and I was just going to segue off of what Matt was saying with the black-eyed Susans, and those are a great cover crop to keep knapweed and bladder campion down. That's a technique people use. On this nature preserve itself, I didn't have a slide for it, but we've been doing intensive restoration on the site. We have highly impacted soils around the building, and it's about a 5-acre footprint, and the greenhouse, is just a drop in the bucket to supplement that. So it's been seeded, and we do a lot of weeding with volunteer help, and it's been a really neat work in progress. And the trickiest thing was to decide what is the natural habitat going to be here. And so the closest thing we could find was dry sand prairie, which has very poor soils, dominated by little blue stem with a few forbs like Monarda and things. So we use that as our palette. And Doug Landis is here from MSU, and he actually worked on a palette with us at the grassland at Arcadia Dunes, which is a 300-acre restoration that we did starting in 2008. And we installed little blue stem using a no-till drill tractor over 90-acre fields, 30-acre fields. We did it in segments. And the little blue stem did pretty well, but it needs a certain depth in the soil, so it's really finicky about where it will grow and how it will do. But we found no-till drilling actually worked pretty well. And the frost seeding that I mentioned earlier is better for forbs, but we also do seed balls and things. But the grassland is a beautiful place if you have a chance to check it out. And it's been an ongoing project there to keep habitat for declining bird species. So over time, the trees would want to recolonize these fields. So it's an active management project for a particular goal. Like I was saying, deciding on your goal for the property is key.
Well, I think you guys have been very generous with your time this morning. I'm going to pass it over to Barb.
Thank you, Matt. Good job, you guys. I wanted to make one point that's like a theme through everything that Angie and Matt have said. Several years ago, when the Botanic Gardens was just getting started, before Matt was here, I stopped into the gift shop, and Karen was there, and I said, could I see your 5-year plan? Do you have a 10-year plan? She said, honey, we have a 50-year plan. We have a 100-year plan. And I think that is the key to what we both do. We care about the long view. And when you're talking about botany and you're talking about caring for your property, or you're talking about caring for nature, the long view is really critical. The Conservancy is in the business of forever. When we protect land, we protect it in perpetuity. So we try and protect it for forever, which is a very long time. And Angie's very good at guiding us for thinking, forward thinking, future thinking. Where are we going? Where's it going to be? It's not what it is right now. It's what it's going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 7 years or 100 years, right? And I encourage you to take that approach with everything that you encounter in nature and everything you encounter in your yards. So thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate it. I hope you join us next week. We have a history of conservation session with some rock stars. Glenn Chowan, our executive director, is going to be talking, along with Helen Taylor, who is the executive director for the Nature Conservancy of Michigan. She's been with the Nature Conservancy for some 30 years. And David Foote, who's not in the room, is going to also share with us some kind of deep history of conservation. So I think it's going to be fun, it'll be interesting, and if you have the time, we'd love to have you join us. And we've plugged it a bunch of times here, but we would really love to have you out on the land with us on June 12th or 13th to see what really is going on in those wetlands and that lake at Perch Lake. It'll be led by our experts. And the other point I was going to make is that when my husband and I hike, we tend to want to book, right? Want to get in our steps, want to get our hearts working. We went out with Angie and with Rick last year to Perch Lake, and Angie said, you guys got to slow down because this is a botany hike, and we're going to walk at botany speed. And so that was a new term for me, botany speed. Okay. It's faster than what the lichen people do. So anyway, thank you very much, you guys, for coming. We love it. If you have some time, stop and check out the displays in the gallery. There's more information there about how the Conservancy works, how we consider priority projects and priority landscapes in our region, and the importance of Perch Lake and the Upper Manistee watershed. So thanks, you guys. Appreciate it.